Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before we get to the episode, just a quick recap on the Northwestern game. I thought it went great. I thought just fantastic result. What we've seen for the first three games of the season is that the Blue Devils are doing just an amazing job at playing sound, fundamental, physical football. You know, each play, each defense is a lot more complicated probably than we understand and what we see on TV and maybe than what we notice at a first glance in person, but these guys are just doing everything right. They're playing very disciplined. They're playing solid, intelligent, physical football, and you have to like where these guys are as a unit. You come out and you beat a Big 20 opponent and really whip them. If that is supposedly one of the top conferences, I know Northwestern's down, but still, that's a big win. That's a win against a Power 5 team. And hey, Duke has 2 wins against Power 5 teams so far. That's pretty darn good. And, I'm excited about where this team is. So I know we've seen in the past Duke teams come out hot, but this is a different breed of team. And I think that these Blue Devils, they really have a chance to keep this going all season long. And I'm really, really excited about it. So let's turn to what else we have on the program before we get into the episode, and that is, of course, voicemails. So we have a voicemail from a new caller, Eli Hartzell. This is his first time calling in. I appreciate him doing it, and let's hear what he has to say.
Good afternoon, guys. What's up? This is Eli Hartzell. I'm 22 years old. I've been going to Duke games since 2008 when I was 7, when David Cutcliffe was first hired. I've seen this program and Wallace Wade Stadium come a long, long way, as I'm sure a lot of you guys have. Looking forward to another great season of Duke football. It's actually even better than this year than we were last year. My only real complaint here is the game day atmosphere on game day, starting with our song selection from the DJ. I don't know who's running the soundboard during the game on game day, but I think the DJ is playing some really outdated songs and songs that aren't exactly made to get a football team of 20-year-olds hyped up, nor the fans who are around the same age. I think our DJ on game day needs to step up his playlist a little bit. I don't know how we fix that. I also think our marching band needs to stop playing the opposing team's fight songs before games. I think that's ridiculous. I think that no other school does that for us, and we shouldn't do that for them. Aside from that, no real complaints. I've been enjoying going to the game so far. I'll be there again this weekend against Northwestern. But yeah, I just think I think that our game day production value could be increased just a tad with a few minor tweaks, and I think those could go a long way. Sorry if this voicemail was long, but yeah, hope to hear myself on this podcast. Let me know what you guys think. Go Duke.
Eli, thank you for calling in, and I'm glad that you have been a committed fan for the last 15 years, and I hope you keep coming and you keep watching the Blue Devils. You have been there for the golden era of Duke football I guess it started under Cutcliffe and it's going on now. Initially, we thought of the golden era as that wonderful period where they went to 4 bowl games in 4 years and won the Coastal, went to the ACC championship game, but it's really continuing under Coach Elko, and I hope he can push it to another level. As far as the game day, I'm not really sure what can be done to fix that. The DJ probably does need to get some new songs. The music selection needs to improve some. Maybe we need to bring in kind of an outside person to really rethink it top to bottom. But I really think that the fans need to start doing some set chants, some set cheers, have some things that organically develop over time to try to get it like some of the other schools in the conference. Of course, Virginia Tech's the gold standard. It's just going to take time, and you're going to have winning for a long period for that to take place. So thank you, Eli, for calling in. Now let's check in with regular caller Jason Rogers, who came in with a pretty darn good, accurate prediction of what we would see from the Blue Devils in their game against Northwestern. He called in before the game, got in a good prediction that was pretty darn close to what the actual score was. Guys, if you're betting people, reach out to Jason on Twitter. You'll be very interested to hear what he has to say.
Hello there, Ben. My voice is a lot better now, and I feel like I've recovered, and I feel like our our players, our student athletes have recovered from a short week from the Leopards, from Clemson to the Leopards game, and I feel like this week we're going to see a good game where our student athletes are fully rested finally. We're in a groove, and just want to send my prediction out there. I think I'm going to slide right up under you, Ben, and say 35-14. And as always, appreciate what you do for us fans as far as your podcast goes, and what another great interview you had this week. Really loved it. Really loved the intel on what you come up with, your questions. But I do have a question for you this week, and do you feel that as our program from last year has excelled to this year, and the great times during the Cutcliffe era, do you feel that teams the coaches are now going, the players and the coaches are feeling there's some pressure by us as far as our program excelling, and instead of us feeling pressure, now we're putting pressure on them to, hey, we better step up and really bring our A game against the Blue Devils. So that's my question. As always, go Duke.
Thank you, Jason, for calling in. I really appreciate the support, and I appreciate the time you take to make these phone calls and to check in with us. It's great stuff.
I don't think that anybody is overlooking the Blue Devils now. I don't think that we're taking anything for granted. And I also think that everybody who is going to play us is going to give us their absolute best. It's almost like what we see in basketball every year. And I, for one, am very, very excited to see that development. Great question. Thank you for it. And thank you for continuing to call in.
Now, we've got another call from our friend Tyler Lester, another regular caller. Thank you again, Tyler, for touching base. Let's hear what you've got to say.
Hey, it's Tyler Lester. Hope everything's going well on your end. Just curious, so it seems to be a big discussion amongst some Duke people currently about the fan turnout and why fans aren't coming out and stuff like this. And I think it's a healthy mixed bag. I think, some fans aren't coming out. Years past, we've been through a lot of uncertainties and promises before that didn't really get, held up to. And then you take that away, you've got a lot of people that maybe just don't know that Duke football is a thing. People in Durham, I feel like, Elko's doing a really good job trying to get the Durham connection, Duke football, really hammer that home, get the community to buy in. But I think the thing that doesn't get addressed is kind of the game day aspect of it. If you're not an Iron Dukes person and, you're not paying for the parking pass, accessibility to the stadium is kind of limited in terms of, where you can park, shuttling, stuff like that. I think if there was one complaint I'd have with Duke, I'd really like to see in the next few years us kind of continue to step up the game day atmosphere in terms of, like Devil's Gate's a great start, trying to, keep additions going on with that, working, shuttling out more ways to get people to the stadium.
Thank you, Tyler. To your point about getting fans come out, I think it's just going to take, and I've said this before, Duke kind of ignored its program for several decades, and they didn't invest in it like they needed to, and the administration let the program down for a long time. So that, I think, has a lot to do with why the fan support is not where it should be, but also I do think an extended period of time of winning will correct that. I also think, though, it comes back to scheduling. Let's take Northwestern, for example. I think that's a great game, but who cares, really? I mean, it's going to be hard to get people to come down from the Chicago area, right? Didn't have that problem with Clemson. Maybe we should get more teams like ECU, like App State. Some of the more local teams, you could put North Carolina Central, a yearly game against them, right? Have them on the schedule to have more local, nearby people come to the game. It's something that we could do. We're not doing. I think that would really help. Now, for parking, hey, come by the circuit lot. That's where we are. That's where we park, and we take a long walk to the stadium before the game. We'd love to have you come hang out with us at the North Carolina State game. All right. Now we've got one more call. It's from the boy. It's our This Week in Sports update about the Ohio Bobcats. Take it away, son.
The Ohio Bobcats played really well. They 10-7 win against Iowa State. Pretty impressive. Really good win. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Mac, for calling in. I can tell you really paid a lot of attention to that game, and I can tell you were clearly focused on it and followed it religiously. Narrator, he didn't. But thank you for calling in. I appreciate it. All right, and that's it for the voicemails. Let's get to the episode.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Bull City Coordinators Duke Football Coverage Podcast. You can find us anywhere you get your podcast. Go to our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Our DMs are open. Send us an email, bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com. And please call 540-632-0160. Leave us a voicemail, and you will get on the podcast. The more voicemails we get, the more mailbag episodes we'll do. We did one earlier this year. I thought it was great. Overall, everybody seems to enjoy them, so please keep calling in. Dan, I know you are listening, so I want to know what happened with the money you put down on the Blue Devils on Saturday against Northwestern. Now, let's pick up with one little minor scheduling matter. In the first couple episodes, I mentioned that there was a chance of getting a North Carolina-related guy to come on the program. That is going to happen. We've got it confirmed. I'm not going to tell you who it is or what the details are. We're going to keep that under wraps. And besides, we don't have time to get to it tonight. But what we do have tonight is a preview of Duke's next opponent. Blue Devils are currently 3-0 after beating Clemson, Lafayette, and then the Big 20 opponent Northwestern. And we now go on the road. This is the first road game of the season. We have to face UCONN, and our next guest covers the Huskies and is a staff writer for UCONN Rivals. Graham Chamberlain, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Glad to do it. I enjoy having you guys on. I've had other people from different parts of the Rivals Network, and they've always been great guests. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? Where can we find you on the social media sites that are out there, and how did you end up covering the Huskies?
Absolutely. So for starters, you can find me at connecticut.rivals.com. That's our Rivals site. I am on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days, at PawsArf, at PAWSARF blog on there. That's pretty much it. For my socials. How I started covering the Huskies. So I've been born and raised in Connecticut. Lifelong fan as long as I can remember, going back to like when they were still in 1AA, now FCS. I've been a season ticket holder since the stadium opened 20 years ago. So I just kind of started. It's like I don't have a ton of people to talk to UConn about. So I was like, I just want to start like a WordPress kind of blog and just kind of get my thoughts out there and whatever happens. So I had no expectations. Started getting interviews with like recruits and commitments, things like that. Rivals reached out to me, and here I am today, largely doing the same thing, just under the Rivals umbrella.
Well, that's fantastic, and I'm glad to hear it. And I think the Huskies and the Blue Devils are in a little bit of the same situation. When you say the names of those two schools, most people think basketball, right?
Yes.
They don't think football, but people are, at least as of right now, certainly with the Blue Devils, thinking football as they should. I think we're ranked 18 in the polls now as of the moment of recording this. But one thing I'm very interested in, as a guy who grew up watching, well, not grew up, but when I was younger, Jim Mora was coaching the Falcons, and what happened there was certainly not all his fault. So I've always kind of rooted for him to do well. Tell us about UConn football and the overall state of the program currently, and then we can get into the season itself later.
Eesh. Wow. I mean, as you know, I'm sure your listeners know, it's been rough. Ever since going to the Fiesta Bowl in 2010 and Randy Edsall leaving the program for the first time, back to back disappointing hires. Start off with Paul Pasqualoni, who had the name and the cachet around Connecticut, being a Connecticut guy, being a good recruiter, especially during his time at Syracuse, when he was able to get guys like Dwight Freeney out of Connecticut, didn't necessarily have like the energy the program needed. It was kind of just like he was a guy that I have no doubt in my mind is a brilliant football mind. Like when it came to game day, when it came to recruiting, wasn't there. They go out and get that guy who has the energy and all the credentials on paper, Bob Diaco, who was a defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. And he had won the Broyles Award as the top assistant the year Notre Dame went to the national championship game. It didn't go great against Alabama. The defense didn't do well, but nonetheless, he kind of had all the credentials, and it kind of turns out a little bit of a micromanager. Just had the energy, didn't have the follow through. And so UConn's kind of at a crossroads. They're not succeeding in the AAC. The Big East exit fee money's drying up. They're paying Bob Diaco's buyout. They're about to start paying Kevin Ollie not to coach basketball either. Although that was just litigated. So the buyout was always a possibility. And they kind of go back to the well with Randy Edsall, and he just didn't have it this time around. He was very openly anti-transfer portal. At the same time, also wanted to get his guys in there and get the old kind of regime out. So you had, at some point, some years, 20, 22, 23 kids transferring. You're replacing them all with true freshmen. You're not going to the portal. So you can imagine how that turned out. It was a lot of young kids who really had no business being out there yet. And then they all transfer out, and you replace them with freshmen, right? And the cycle just keeps going. And eventually, they didn't play in 2020, which I think was a disastrous decision. Some accounts were that he wasn't here in Connecticut during that time. He was home in Florida, so not with the program. So those are just reports. But, and then they start 2021. And I should mention, he had no buyout at this time either. So they could have fired him after 2019, and it would cost them nothing. They start 2021. They got to Fresno State. Week 0, just get obliterated. Come in, lose to Holy Cross at home. It wasn't especially close. And then there was kind of a weird, is he going to retire? Is he fired? First, he said that I'm going to retire, but I'll finish the season. And then UConn said, no, you have to go. Right. So this leads to Jim Mora. And Jim Mora is pro transfer portal, which was great to hear because UConn had a lot of areas of need, and they really just needed to get bodies in there. UConn's not going to be a program that gets 4 to 5 star recruits. They're lucky to even just get a few 3 stars. So they really try to just find these under the radar guys and develop them. And part of the way you can do that is supplement through the transfer portal while these younger guys are getting acclimated to the college game, to the speed, the playbook, the weight room, being in college, etc. Last year was, it was good. They went 6-7, which is far exceeded most people's expectations. Certainly mine. I was happy to win 3. And they went to Myrtle Beach Bowl, lost to Marshall, had most of the guys coming back. So there was optimism this season. You had 4 out of 5 guys in the offensive line returning. You had quarterback transferring in from Maine, another quarterback that was injured last year coming back off injury. Running back room was stacked last year. They all came back, with the exception of one who was injured for most of the season. He transferred to Michigan State. Defense lost a couple of linebackers and a defensive back, but everybody else is back. And as you know, they're 0-3 this year. And certainly not playing the way anybody thought that they'd be playing at this point. And it's hard to explain. You hear that people are coming back and you think they'll at least stay the same. But I think last year, the analytics didn't like UConn last year, and it turns out they were right. I think there was a way that some of their scheme and play calling could kind of mask some of the issues that they had. And I think they can't do that this year. So 0-3, averaging 15 points a game on offense. It's not, things aren't great because it's like, where's the help going to come from?
Is the offense the biggest problem? Because I watched the NC State game. I was impressed by the defense. I thought they played well. I thought they had more size than I expected. The quarterback did not look, and I don't want to say this to be critical of the guy, but
Sure.
it didn't seem like he was ready for D1 level college football.
So that was his first FBS game. He comes in from Maine, where UConn's offensive coordinator was the head coach prior to coming to Connecticut. His stats at Maine were okay. He would get about 200, 210 yards per game, which would be fantastic for UConn to get. But ultimately, they went 2-9 last year, Maine did. And, his first game against NC State, that's a tough first game. It's a tough defense. And, UConn's receivers didn't help him. They dropped several passes. He's now injured for the season. So he hurt his shoulder the next game against Georgia State. But to your point about the defense, they certainly have size. They have Eric Watts on the defensive line, who's a Senior Bowl invite for this year. The whole defensive line returns. They returned Jackson Mitchell at linebacker, who had 140 tackles last year. But they lose two guys who were very, very productive linebacking core, Ian Swenson and Brandon Boyer-Randall. And I think they're really feeling those two linebacker losses. They've been supplemented by a transfer from Delaware, Noah Plack, who's played fine, but certainly no Ian Swenson, who he's replacing as kind of like that hybrid safety linebacker role. And then the other offensive line position is just they're trying to find the right guy. And it's not there. And Jackson Mitchell's kind of being dragged other places because he's trying to kind of support each linebacker. And I think teams are exploiting that thus far.
So as far as offense and the wins and where things are going to come from, looking at the schedule, we can get into the Duke game later, but just to get to know the program as a whole, where do you think the wins are left on the schedule? Because looking at it, I mean, they've got Duke, Utah State, South Florida, Tennessee, James Madison, and then UMass, Sacred Heart. I mean, there's, Boston College, if they play like they did against Florida State, Boston College will win. But if they played like they did the first two games of the season, maybe UConn beats them. Where do you think realistically wins are for UConn?
Coming into the year, I was thinking 6, maybe 7, and that path was you either beat Georgia State or Rice on the road, one or the other. You beat Florida International, you beat Utah State, South Florida, and then you've got UMass and Sacred Heart end of the year. Obviously, they've lost to Florida International already, and they lost to Georgia State already. And now that I've been able to watch some other games, I've seen USF, I've seen Rice, I don't know that they win their first game. Their first win really might not be until Sacred Heart on November 18th. A low FCS team coming in. And, I would hope that they can kind of turn things around a little bit. And I still, Utah State, I think, is a possibility. And I think South Florida is a possibility. Like you said about BC, I'm curious to see how they play this week against Louisville, coming off that emotional game against Florida State. I think that will be very telling about what kind of team BC is. But yeah, I don't see a pathway to a bowl game currently the way that they're playing.
And I think to BC, they have a new quarterback who's kind of started coming in and playing more. And I think he might be benefiting. I'm not trying to knock the guy, but it's always good when you're a new quarterback and there's not a lot of film on you for the defensive coordinators to really scheme against you. He may be benefiting from that. I think the Louisville game will be a good test because that team is playing really confident, the Cardinals. Yep. So we'll see what happens with that. And then they play Virginia, which could be the ugliest ACC game in history.
I can't say anything because I'm a UConn fan, but I mean, it may be a tough watch. Yeah.
I mean, I can because I've been a Duke football fan for a long time, and history and ugly football, they shake hands. What's that meme with the two hands shaking from Predator? That was Duke football for a long time. Okay.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah, so I can speak with some authority on that. It was funny. I got back from a kid's soccer game, and one of the moms was saying, I thought I was being a really good wife this year. I bought my husband season tickets for UVA football, and I said, "What did you do that for? Are you trying to get a divorce or something?" She said, "I didn't realize they were going to be this bad," and I said, "Well, that's okay. The thought was there, but
yeah,
I mean, I think they were at the James Madison game and left because they thought it was well in hand, and then the bag broke.
Yeah.
Ooh, man, rough. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit. Kind of, talked about how Mora is pro portal, how he's trying to get guys in. What is the mood around him right now? I mean, did he build up a lot of credibility with last season, get him to a bowl game?
Yeah, I think there's still trust in him among the fan base. Most of the ire I've seen has been towards the offensive coordinator, who, it was a conservative offense last year, but they were playing a true freshman quarterback, and guys were still kind of learning the scheme. And so I think it kind of said, okay, well, now that this kid's had a whole year in the system, you brought in your own guy. You also have another quarterback who actually won the job last year, but got hurt literally second drive of the first game. Like, you had these guys coming back, like the quarterback competition should be pretty robust, and it came out, and where you watched against NC State and you saw what it looked like, and like that first drive against NC State was beautiful, it was perfect. It was like everybody's like, this is great. And once you get off that script, it is ugly, ugly, ugly. I know Jim Moore knows that. He's made it very clear when talking to the media, like, our offensive play calling is not it. Like, we have to do better on offense. And it's, again, like I said before, I don't know where the help's going to come from. They're a run first team. They'll run the ball 60-65% of the time. They really struggled to run against NC State. Well, they were able to break off 171-yard touchdown run, which kind of skewed the numbers a little bit. But for the most part, guys were getting, around 3 to 3.5 yards per carry, which last year they're getting close to 5. Georgia State, they had 50 rushing yards total. Could not move the ball against them. I mean, I think they ran it like, I have the stats in front of me here. I want to say it was like 29 times or something like that. It was rough. They ended up at like pretty close to about 1.5 yards per carry. So couple that with the inability to throw the football, it was an ugly night in Atlanta. So the quarterback who started the year, Joe Fagnano, the main transfer, hurt his shoulder. And so the current starting quarterback, Taquan Roberson, who transferred in last year from Penn State, did pretty well in mop-up duty. And so people were a little hopeful because the flow was pretty good and he was moving the ball. But again, it's against largely like prevent D. And he came out this past weekend against Florida International, 4 for 14, 33 yards in the first half. UConn was down 24-3 at halftime. They've been outscored 45-3 in the first half the last 2 games. So there's a lot of questions out there about this team and where they're headed, because I said there's not a lot of wins in the schedule. People were expecting a bowl game. I had seen people out there saying they should be winning 8-9 games, which I thought was a little crazy. But, the hope was there, and it has not been a good start to the season.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to get to that many wins anyway, just because you have Duke, NC State, not so much Boston College, but you also have Tennessee, and James Madison is a very good program.
Absolutely.
That's not,
yep.
that is not an easy win anytime, given the way that the Dukes have played over the last several years. I mean, they are good. So it could just be just a bad schedule year. But you talked about some frustration coming towards the offensive coordinator, Nick Charlton, excuse me. What does his future look like as a member of the Huskies, do you think?
Well, what's curious is I had thought he came in as kind of like a coach in waiting. Jim Moore doesn't have a ton of years left. And Charlton left a head coaching position at Maine to be the offensive coordinator here. He has associate head coach title along with offensive coordinator. He's one of the most highly paid group of 5 assistants. I want to say he's like second in salary. So my guess is the expectation was he sticks around for a long time. But at the same time, 15 points per game is not going to win you any games in college football, not in 2023.
Not unless you're Iowa.
So, well, yeah, unless you're Iowa. But even then, like I would take like a 25 point per game, like improvement plan or whatever Ferentz is on out there. Like I would take something like that at this point. But unless things really turn around the rest of the season, I can't see him coming back. And, UConn is hard. It's a hard place to recruit. It's not a fertile recruiting ground, and they're kind of in this catch-22 where it's like they need to be an attractive program to get recruits to come. And part of being an attractive program is being a fun offense to play in. And you can't get the receivers that you need when you're handing the ball off 60 to 65% of the time. But like also at the same token, you can't change that and start recruiting, based off of a new offense you may install because you don't have the receivers to not run the ball 60% of the time. So they're in this weird kind of catch-22, and I don't know how they're going to get the level of talent that they need. The Northeast doesn't have enough players to satisfy filling out the rosters at BC, at Syracuse, at Pitt, Temple, Rutgers, UConn, like all the FCS programs. There's not enough players here. And, if you're in the Southeast, if you're in Georgia, you're in South Carolina, Florida, North Carolina, you've got offers between the Sun Belt schools and UConn. Like, why wouldn't you pick the Sun Belt schools? So I think they're having a tough time recruiting. They're trying to supplement through the portal, but again, they're getting guys that, a lot of them were at P5, but they didn't play. And we're actually not seeing a lot of those P5 transfers even crack the lineup these days. So their most impactful transfers have been a few FCS guys. Let's give an idea of how things are going with the talent on the roster. And so I don't know how Charlton can kind of turn it around. I think they're playing a bit conservative. They're playing a little pensive. I think they're playing not to make mistakes. And it's not working out. Paraphrasing, but former UConn great Dan Orlovsky says there's a difference between protecting the football and valuing the football. And when you protect the football, you're playing not to lose. And when you value the football, you're going to try to make some plays that you think are going to win you the game. Not making a silly turnover, but try to open things up a little bit. And we thought that they try to open things up against Florida International, and it was really more of the same. They just have an inability to move the ball through the air. And they're able to get the running game going a little bit against FIU, but I would expect that when you have, 3 Senior Bowl invitees on your offensive line. That's a position of strength.
So it seems like the answer to this for UConn is maybe to turn into a wishbone or triple option kind of attack.
It's come up, and some people have it's got a DM about a recruit that not good.
Breaking news!
A commitment, I should say. Okay, well, we'll talk about that later. The triple options come up, and a lot of people have been like, "That's crazy." And I don't know. Like, they haven't had a passing attack since Dan Orlovsky. It's been almost 20 years. And they've had talented quarterbacks that they've recruited. They just didn't have the coaching or the system to succeed in it. Like, I look at Tim Boyle, who was frankly bad at UConn. I think at one point he had like a 1-11 touchdown interception ratio. He goes to Eastern Kentucky. He gets picked up by the Packers. He makes an NFL career for himself, being Aaron Rodgers' friend. When he follows him to New York on the Jets, he's been in the league for 6-7 years now. Coming out of Eastern Kentucky, not Connecticut, but that's where it started. So it's like, even when they get a recruit, they can't do anything with it at the quarterback position. And so I'm open to all suggestions at this point.
Well, I mean, to go back to it, it's not, I think, criticism necessarily. It's more a reflection of, you've got to do something. When it comes to football, you are built around your offensive line and your defensive line. And if you're having a hard time recruiting the skill position players, you can make a program really attractive to at least the offensive linemen that you need to do well by running a triple option. And then you can hide some of the weaknesses on your defense by not having them on the field a whole lot. And if you get the ball going well, I mean, if it's humming, then it's going to be hard to beat. The question is, how often can you get it humming? But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Army and Navy have had a ton of success with it.
Yeah. And, the reasons that Army and Navy have to run that offense is that they can't recruit at the same level everybody else can, especially with the limitations on academics and, you can only get, I think it's like 2 from a certain congressional district. Like, they have X amount of slots they can fill in the whole school. But UConn has the same issues with recruiting. They can't get the players. They need they're kind of in like a recruiting dead zone, and there's not a lot of buzz around the program. So maybe you do that. Maybe you reach out, hey, Paul Johnson, do you want to be interested in coming back to coaching? Or, Navy's former coach, I don't know, forgot where he is now. I want to say San Diego State or somewhere out west, I thought. Like, hey, do you want to come back to the head coaching ranks? It's not easy, but it might be what needs to be done.
So what is the biggest challenge that actually he is at UCLA as a director of leadership? Okay. I'm not sure. I'm not trying to be critical. I just don't really understand what that means.
Sure.
But
yeah.
So what is the biggest challenge at UConn? Is it the fact that they're independent? Is it just that it's not been kind of a thing there? I mean, the last time I really remember a lot of buzz around it was Skip Holtz, and then of course in the Big East with Edsel, but it collapsed. I mean,
yeah.
Is it that they're independent, or is it something more than that?
I think the independence has helped a little bit in that, they can schedule more games that they think they can win. And it certainly looks better when the games you're losing 50-0 are to Michigan instead of Tulsa, right? But, UConn wasn't competitive in the AAC either. And, the conference was kind of blamed because it was hard to get, it was hard to sell those games. They didn't have the rivalries. You weren't playing Syracuse anymore. You weren't playing Louisville. These teams, Rutgers, Pitt, these teams you had shared histories with. And when you go to the AAC, and the football was good in the AAC. It's just that UConn had, it said earlier, you had poor coaching, poor recruiting, and they just became a laughing stock eventually. 2018 comes, they have the worst defense ever in recorded college football history until UMass comes along next year and takes that record from them, which thank you to the Minutemen for that. And they actually had a decent offense that year. They had Rhett Lashley, who's now the head coach at SMU, and, they were scoring so many points. They were asking the defense was asking the offense to slow down a little bit because defense couldn't handle being out there so often. So that was where the last time offense was humming. It's just always been, they've always seemed to me as a fan to always kind of be behind the 8 ball. Like back in the Big East, they had some success, right? I mean, but they never won more than 8 games in the Big East. And you always felt like when you were playing these spread teams like USF and West Virginia, that like UConn couldn't hang. And there was no way they would ever do that. Like it was like watching a completely different football game. It's like, are we even watching the same sport? When you watch West Virginia come out with Pat White and Steve Slayton and Tavon Austin, all these guys, like these athletes that UConn will never have, felt like running an offense UConn would never run. And so I think now the challenge is they're independent. And I said earlier, why pick Connecticut when you have these other schools where football is probably, you have more of a college football culture down south. It's not big here. People will go when they win. Like people support UConn. It's like, it's the team here.
That
right?
rings a bell. Yeah.
When they were in the Big East, they were selling out the stadium, yearly. And, you have the cachet from basketball. But basketball is always going to be king. And I think from a recruiting standpoint, that's hard to overcome because you have these guys that want to be the guy. They want to be the guy on campus. They don't want to be the ones that, are kind of second tier. And that's kind of how football is seen. And, there was a big hullabaloo this summer when, there were rumors to go with the Big 12. There was a real split in the fan base. I mean, there's people that were just like, I would rather destroy football than ever leave the Big East in basketball. So it's pretty evident, that the fan base wants basketball to succeed. And, that's usually to football's detriment because the Big East obviously doesn't sponsor football. So where does UConn go?
Yeah, that's a good question. If that's tough. Not a lot of good
USA has
answers.
been brought up, but how does that solve the issues you had in the AAC, right? I mean, at least in the AAC, you had like Cincinnati, you had UCF, Temple was relatively nearby, Navy relatively nearby. Like that was okay. But like now that you look at Conference USA, and it's like you got to sell Sam Houston State, and no disrespect to the Bearcats, but they probably care as much about UConn as people in Connecticut care about Sam Houston State. So that's a hard sell. And it seems like it's Power 5 or bust. And it's been 20 years now waiting on the ACC invite that's not coming.
Well, the thing with the ACC, and I kind of felt like looking at the schedule that maybe UConn was trying to audition to get in the ACC.
They are, yeah.
But the ACC is relatively stable for about 10 years. If you look at the TV contracts, the thing that I worry about as a Duke fan is I'm just going to try to enjoy these 10 years because I don't know what's going to happen with this next round of restructuring. I don't call it realignment, but I don't know what's going to happen because is the TV money going to be there like it is now? Are schools that maybe aren't performing historically, like the Vanderbilts and the Northwesterns and the Big Ten and the SEC, going to get told this? It's not us, it's you. Is that going to happen? And then, where's a school like the Blue Devils that historically, much like UConn, basketball has been king and the football fan base is not as good as it should be as a result of bad decisions that the administration made over a long period of time, right? What happens to schools like Duke, to, Wake Forest, even, although their football culture, I think, has been a lot more stable. Certainly up until recently in the Blue Devils. What happened to those schools? Where do they go?
Right. And I certainly do think it just truly wouldn't shock me to see, the top 50 revenue producers just break off, at least in football. For starters, I think eventually it comes for basketball too, but I can see these guys just kind of breaking off and starting their own, get their own media deals, and that's going to be that. And maybe, the Olympic sports all go regional, which I think would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Should be. But I do think there is some sort of like relegation that occurs. Part of the issue now is, like Florida State and Clemson are getting paid less than Vanderbilt. Yeah. And that has to just really anger them, and it should, right? Because it's not about like a meritocracy always in these conferences. You mentioned Northwestern, another example in the Big Ten, making more money than anybody. Like, what's Northwestern ever done? What's Rutgers ever done? Being in the Big Ten. And that's a sore subject up here in Connecticut, but, it's like, when UConn was passed over, they were coming off the Fiesta Bowl appearance. They won a basketball national championship. And there was a sense of like, what else, what more do we have to do? And so that's really the direction I see college football heading. And I hope it makes regional conferences for football as well. I would love like a Northeast conference, a true East Coast conference, like an old like ECAC again, and
be fantastic.
Have your divisional teams, and every couple of years play Duke, play every year in basketball, hopefully. I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
I see a lot of benefits to it, but I also know that no one's really going to pull that trigger, because right now you got a sure thing going until the grant of rights is up in 2036, something like that.
Yeah, I think the big movement you'll see will probably be around 2033, maybe 2032. Teams may have the money to pay for a buyout or a negotiated exit by then. But I think you're looking at 2033. That's typically when those TV deals start to get less risky for teams to say we're not coming back. So the grant of rights is in place and the ESPN deal's in place for 2036. But what the landscape will look like then, we'll know really 2030 through 2033 when you see the AAC get its new deal, the Big Ten get its new deal, and of course the SEC get its new deal. But I would love to get I would love to see the Olympic sports go separate, and I would love to see a good old basketball. You guys, like, you have a great basketball conference, right?
Yeah. It's going to be unpopular among the UConn fan base. It's not as fun for me. It's going to sound mean. It's the Big East schools that, like, they weren't the big games. Or like now the big game is UConn Providence. And like that was never a big game on the schedule. That was always like, Providence could be pesky sometimes, but it was like you were never worried about Providence supplanting you in the college basketball hierarchy, right? The big games were Syracuse, the big games were Pitt, St. John's once upon a time when they had like Ron Artest, right? Turn of the millennium. They were always like a CBS game in February. Seton Hall, Villanova.
Yeah.
But there are good new teams like Creighton, and then Marquette left over from the Big East. It's a good conference, and it's a basketball first conference. These teams have put everything into basketball. So that's where UConn fits. That's about all is where they fit, because they're the only public school in this conference. Only public flagship school in the Big East. So they're kind of they're with 10 other like Catholic institutions. They don't necessarily fit. And they also don't necessarily fit in terms of athletic investment for Olympic sports as well. But like I said, basketball is king. So,
well, the good thing about it though is the ACC as a basketball conference just is not what it was, right? To your point, it's not the same as when you played every team twice a year, when it was Wake, UVA, North Carolina, NC State. Even when you got Florida State in early on with Pat Kennedy, there were some good years, and Florida State's turned into a good team. Miami's turned into a really good addition. But there's just a lot of teams that you watch them play, and you just I'm sorry, I just don't really care. I mean, it's hard for me to your point to really care about that. But I mean, I have to imagine the vibe at the Big East Conference tournament is great, right?
It's incredible, incredible. Like that was a lot of fans when the Big 12 rumors were going on. It's like, what about Big East tournament? Like, it's such an experience. You can never go, get a day pass. Couldn't recommend it more. It's just a great day of basketball.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate though that you guys lost all those big rivalries, that made the Big East the Big East. Uh, but at least now though you have guys who are there, they want to be there, they're committed to it, and you don't have to worry about Florida State or Clemson ruining the conference over we're not making enough money. We can't compete if we don't make enough money, and that's just not the case. But we'll see what happens. And as a Duke fan, I'm just going to try to enjoy the next 10 years and hope it works out. That's where I am with it.
That's all you can do. It's out of our hands.
Right. Right. Because apparently trying to win the most games for your team is not the goal.
No.
So, why would you want your fans to watch a winning product? I mean, that's crazy talk, right?
It's whatever Fox executives think or ESPN executives think makes money. I don't.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let me ask you, how do you feel about the new additions to the conference?
So here are my thoughts on it is, one, the Stanford and Cal additions don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense from travel, from logistics, from their TV ratings aren't as bad as everybody says, but their programs are not very good right now. Okay. SMU is developing and they'll grow and they've got more money than God, it seems like. So I think they'll be okay. Yeah. I don't know why my mom and dad didn't find a way to become oil barons. Maybe we had to go back further in line, but I'm going to have a conversation about that later.
Yeah.
But I think if you're Jim Phillips and you're trying to grow the conference, right? Your main job at this point really is to make money, right? That's you have to find new revenue stream because everybody is complaining Jim Phillips doesn't have a plan. He's not bringing any money. We're not getting anything here. We need to do something. We need to increase our revenue. What's your plan? What's your plan? And he says, well, here's the thing. We've got this long TV deal. There's not a whole lot I can do, but I can get you 3 new teams, one of whom will essentially pay us to be in the conference. Okay.
Yep.
And we're going to make money off of other people's money with this. And so why you would turn down SMU, I have no idea. So if you're North Carolina, if you're Florida State and you're Clemson and you're voting against adding SMU, then you need to, and I'll put the explicit label on this, shut the hell up and stop whining and complaining about how we need more money. And someone's like, well, here, take this money. Here is a whole lot of damn money. Take it. And you still whine and complain about it. So those 3 schools should just shut up. I think it's a good addition, and just because if for nothing else, it allows the conference to expand. And what we saw at the Pac-12, and there's more behind it than just that. If you don't expand, you die. They had a chance to merge with the Big 12 schools, right? They said no. I mean, San Diego State is just like, was it John Cusack from that movie with the with the stereo up there? Like, let us in, please let us in. They're doing everything they can to get attention. And then what do they say? No, we're good. And then they wake up one morning and they say, well, what happened to the Pac-12? How did we fall apart?
Same with Boise. Boise would have done whatever, I'm sure, to get in that conference. But, from my understanding was, a lot of the schools, like the Cals and the Stanford, like we don't want to be associated with academic schools like that. And ultimately, that was the conference's demise.
That and being stupid about the money. I mean, about not realizing kind of what was there. They could have survived, and maybe they'll do the remaining 2. I mean, Oregon State and Washington State, you got to feel terrible for those schools.
Yeah, I do, because we lived it, kind of going through realignment. We left out, not in the same exact position as being only 2 members left of a conference. Yeah, it's a very shell-shocked feeling, especially when you count these people as your peers for decades. And then all of a sudden you're told you're not.
And it's not like you're a terrible program.
Right. I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, UConn football has been great, but like in terms of an overall athletic program, like it's pretty good. I think it'd be a pretty good addition, but said they don't bring a new market, so.
And I don't understand how the TV decisions are made. I don't understand what goes into them. As a guy who really likes college basketball, I'd love to have UConn in the same conference as Duke, as North Carolina, as Virginia. I mean, I think it'd be great.
Yeah.
As Miami. But we'll see what happens with the ACC. I mean, these three additions that were made, I think, were designed to stave off later defections and to try to bring in more money to throw around to try to keep people happy. And really, that's about all you can do. And I don't know if they try to expand later or not. Maybe Mora gets on a roll there from a football perspective, gets it going, and another decision's made. I don't know. I think, again, I'll start paying attention right around 2030 and then to restructuring. Then I think we'll start to see kind of things take shape. But I mean, who knows what will happen? And honestly, to your point about the academic snobbery that goes on, if football is what matters, Oregon State and Washington State are two pretty good football programs right now. I mean, imagine if you could bring those two into the ACC or the All Coast Conference, as I'm calling it now.
Might as well get you a couple extra travel partners, if they're willing to kind of pony up some cash or forego some cash.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know what kind of reserves they have. I know they were taking a little aback with not sure the whole details, but like with Pac-12 ended up owing Comcast back some money, like overpaid the media deal or something to that effect. And like I know, like hearing specifically like schools like Washington State, where I think we don't have like that cash to just pay back. They don't have that. They're not like USC.
Yeah, it's going to be complicated to see how they wrap up. There's going to be a lot of litigation, and I think that there's going to be business courses that are taught about how the Pac-12 mismanaged itself into
most definitely.
Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting is like 8 of their teams are ranked right now in the top 25.
They're having a tremendous year. It's, I'm sure ESPN's salivating at the next 30 for 30, but it's a good conference this year.
It's crazy because if football matters, then why is it that the conference is falling apart? That's the part that's really hard to understand. But we'll see what happens. Let's turn back to Duke and UConn. Throw me your prediction. Tell me who you think and who you think is going to win and why.
Oh, it's going to be Duke. I don't think it's going to be particularly close. I'm looking at UConn has struggled immensely with running quarterbacks, and I know Riley Leonard is not run first, obviously, but he can scoop, and I think he'll do it this week. And then even if he doesn't, I mean, you've got two guys behind him who are averaging 6-7 yards carry. I just between that and I thought Florida International exposed our DBs a little bit and just some out routes. So I can't imagine what Duke will do. And most notably, UConn just can't score the football. So I can just see a game where it's relatively close beginning, and the defense is just going to get gassed. So I'm going to go, say, 45, maybe 10. Maybe they get a garbage time touchdown. I'm not sure. I'm going 45-10 Duke.
You have all the hope and optimism that I had for the Blue Devils when I started the Bull City Coordinators blog, which became a way for me to sarcastically and bitterly work out my frustration on the Blue Devils. And I did. There were a couple of guys at Duke that I made mad, and I don't know if they still listen. And not because they followed me regularly, but there was one or two things that I had written because there's not a lot of Duke football bloggers that got out there. And so if they are listening now, and I did tell this to somebody recently, I said,
I never really envisioned that this would become a podcast or that I'd get to know a lot of the people that I got to know through this. And if I had known that from the beginning, I would not have been so sarcastic and dour and just kind of grumpy when I started out. So I feel the pain of what you're going through. It resonates with me through decades of Duke football that hopefully Coach Elko has us turned away from. My prediction, I'm going to take Duke as well. I'm going to take Duke 42-13 because it would not surprise me if they pull a couple of guys to get ready for the Notre Dame game coming up on the 30th. That's going to be a big game. Hoping my tickets come through for that one. We'll see. Someone who may not go might gift them to me if he can't go. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, that would be great. Did you go to Clemson?
Oh yeah, man. It was unreal.
It looked cool on TV.
It was a lot of fun, and I got to see a couple players who played when I was a teenager, when I was in high school. I'd interviewed Chris Combs before, and I saw Sims Lenhart and bumped into some guys. But I'll tell you, I'm trying to get out of this. I always have this suspicion that something's going to go wrong. Just it's kind of conditioned in my brain. So when Duke's getting the points and they're scoring, and you're like, okay, well, Clemson's still moving the ball, and then just self-destruct, or the defense for Duke makes a great play. I'm like, okay, when is this going to turn? When are we going to? When are they? But they just kept playing and they stayed calm. And here is kind of what I think about the Blue Devils, where they are right now, and it's not a secret. Connor O'Neill talked about it in his column. They've really, and the OG podcast has done the same thing. I think these guys have really taken on the mindset of their head coach. I think they're really buying into Elko's system, and I think that Coach Elko doesn't let the moment get too big for him, and these guys are the same way. They're not going to let, Calhoun kind of flubs that punt early against Clemson. Clemson gets a touchdown. He just forgets about it. The team doesn't get rattled. In years past, they would have fallen apart. But these guys are like, all right, one play. All right, let's get back out there.
I was thinking that was a possibility when it happened. I was like, uh-oh. Like, don't let that be. Because Duke was outplaying them. I was like, don't let this be. I've seen this movie.
Right.
Don't give them any points. Don't give them any hope.
My brother was sitting right next to me, and we're both kind of like, here we go. But these guys, they're older. They're sharpened mentally, physically, and I think they realize that they got a chance to do something special this year. And after everything they went through towards the end of the Cutcliffe years, I think they want to take advantage of it. So we'll see what happens against UConn and Notre Dame. I have more confidence about NC State. Florida State, we'll see. They're a tough team. They're a tough team.
Mm-hmm.
And, Pittsburgh, that comment from the defensive back for West Virginia after the backyard brawl about Jurkovich.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, what is it? He says, we knew he wasn't really good at his job or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was just so.
Maybe... when the shoe fits,
numbers can be used to lie, but the numbers in this instance are not lying. I mean,
that was hard. I was very excited because, old Big East rivalry. I was like, yeah, man, backyard brawls is going to be great. I had to turn it off. I can't watch this for fun. It was just not an enjoyable game to watch.
No, I think I saw Djokovic throw a pick, and I said, I'm not going to watch this. I see where this is going. But we'll see what happens with the Blue Devils this year. I'm very excited about them, and I'm just taking it one game at a time and enjoying the moment and trying not to look ahead. I'm excited to watch the UConn game. I think it'll be a lot of fun. Maybe the audition goes well for UConn and we bring you guys into the All Coast Conference sometime soon. We'll see what happens.
That'd be the dream.
Okay, one quick additional game prediction. I did not know if this was going to happen or not, but we do have it coming. We have a call-in from fantasy land that is Richlandia. We're going to hear his prediction for the UConn game right now.
Well, hello everyone from Ben's dad here in Richlandia. we're headed into what might be the most important weekend of the season. In order for our Blue Devils to make my 10-2 prediction come true, this is game number 4 coming up in East Hartford, Connecticut, against the Huskies, who are 0-3, averaging about 15 points a game and giving up just under 28 a game. They rush for about 128 yards a game and give up nearly 180 on the ground. Through the air, they're 52 out of 98 so far with a couple of picks, averaging 186 yards per game. And the opponents get about 194 a game through the air. They've scored 6 touchdowns and have given up 11. Good punter, averaging 46.5 per kick. They've committed 20 penalties for 186 yards. And somehow they've managed to have a pretty good time of possession with over 30 minutes a game. They are 21 out of 48 on third down, 2 for 4 on fourth. They've lost a couple of fumbles and given up 5 sacks. Their leading rushers, Houston and Rosa, get about 50 yards per game, and at quarterback they've used 2, but Fagnano is going to be out, I think, for the rest of the season, and Roberson is the transfer from Penn State who's taken over, and he's had about 2/3 of their snaps, accounting for 3 touchdowns and completing over 50% of his passes. Buckman, Jolie, and Ross have been their main receiving targets with 16, 11, and 10 catches respectively. Buckman and Houston 1 TD reception each. Mitchell and Jones are their leading tacklers, but Yates and Stafford have the most TFLs with 6 and 5. 7 TDs they've allowed inside the red zone in 10 tries, along with 1 field goal, and Huskies themselves are 4 for 5 in the red zone with 3 TDs and a field goal. Second of 3 straight games for them at home coming up here against our Blue Devils, and of course our common opponent, NC State, beat them in the home opener up there 24-14. Look for the Blue Devils to stay focused. I know a lot of us are kind of looking ahead a little bit toward that big Notre Dame game, but we need to stay focused, do what's in front of us, and I think we'll pull away and win this one about 34-10. Getting close again last week on my score prediction, but hopefully we'll hit it on the nose this week. And let's go Duke. And Ben, don't forget the milk.
All right, thank you for calling in. Your 10-2 prediction is actually finally something that may come true this year. It's only taken you, let's see, if you do it annually, you've had it go right for you 1 time. This could be the 2nd time. I'm telling you, there's a chance. Thanks, Dad, for calling in, and I'm glad to know things are going great in Richlandia.
Well, Graham, we've had a great talk. This veered off into some directions I didn't plan on, but I thought it was very informative, and I thought we covered a lot of very relevant topics. Since I have asked you a whole lot of questions, I would like to take a moment to give you a chance to have an open mic and to say anything that you'd like to say.
Oh, sure. Well, first up, thank you for having me again. I hope that in terms of this Saturday, I hope UConn shows improvement. I hope they can keep it close. I hope that they can impress Cooper Flagg, who's visiting officially this weekend. I don't know why they're bringing him to the football game. There's something else going on campus and store, so they got to bring him to the football game. So hopefully he has fun at the game and doesn't get too impressed by Duke. And yeah, like you said, I hope, just when it comes to Connecticut, I love it's my state, it's my team. I can't change loyalties. So I hope that they can improve, and hopefully someday, whether it's whatever the heck you'll call the new ACC, with a weird hodgepodge of like BC and the North Carolina schools, UConn, Syracuse, whatever comes, I hope that UConn's a part of it.
Well, I think it would not be a bad idea because I'm a basketball purist, so I'm all in favor of it. I think it'd be great. But I do want to say thanks again for coming on. Everybody, keep listening. I don't have a guest for every game lined up this season, but we're going to do what we can for that. And I appreciate everybody listening. Go to our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Send us a message on Twitter at DukeFB Coverage. Our DMs are open. Send us an email, bullcitycoordinators.com. And give us a call to get on the pod. You know the number, 540-632-0160. And as always, go Duke.